Most of us believe that the Bible says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Well, we now know that is no longer the truth, that the original opening statement of the Bible says, "The Father of the beginnings created the Elohim, the heavens and the earth," and that has profound implications of who the creator of everything in existence is, who the Elohim are, that the Elohim are not actually God, or that they are the gods of the Bible. A plural of El is Elohim, and that somehow humanity fits into the equation, and that the Father of the beginnings is closely related to the sound and the source of resonance that brought everything into creation. It also takes us to chapter 2 of the Bible and Genesis 2, where we first encounter the mention of gold. What I find fascinating is that gold in the Bible is mentioned before Eve even comes into creation. Yes, that's how important gold is in all of human history. Before Eve has even been fashioned from Adam's rib, the narrator of the Bible, whoever the narrator may be, tells us about the land of Havilah, where the land is good, the water is good, and by the way, there is gold. So you've got to ask yourself, why is gold so important? And as we work through these episodes, you realize that gold is at the center of our appearance on this planet. Homo sapiens, human beings as we know ourselves today, are inextricably connected to the obsession and the manipulation and the use of gold on this planet. This takes us to the southern tip of Africa in 1898, when the British Empire, the largest empire that has ever existed and still controls the world today, launched the most expensive war in its entire history. It's when they sent 470,000 troops to the southern tip of Africa to find 60,000 farmers on horseback and about another 60,000 native Africans with shields and spears. It became known as the South African War from 1899 to 1902, when two independent Boer republics, Boer means farmer for those who don't know, B-O-E-R, Boer republics, when two independent Boer republics resisted the British occupation and stood up against the might of the British Empire. The question we have to ask ourselves, what was so important that the British Empire would mobilize such a dramatic onslaught by sending 470,000 troops so far away, by ship, all the horses, the food, the kitchens, the hospitals, the support systems for such a large army to go by ship all the way down to South Africa to occupy a piece of the world that is so far removed from Mother England, it truly boggles the mind. Clearly, there had to be a very, very serious reason for this. This era in our history and the foundation for this was laid by this man here, Cecil John Rhodes, who in his life was probably, and during this period of our history, was probably the most powerful man in the world. Many of you will know him for the Rhodes Scholarship, and he was at that stage the wealthiest man, most likely, and a very, very influential human being that had an ear of the Queen and the British royalty, the royal bloodlines, pretty much at his fingertips, and was an instrument of the royal bloodlines to secure Southern Africa for the crown. And it was pretty much all about the gold, and it was all about securing Southern Africa for the crown. And when I say the crown, I don't mean the Queen or the royal throne. I'm talking about the Crown Temple. The Crown Temple in the City of London, one of the 3 independent states that exists on our earth today, which are the City of London, which many of you will know is a private corporation, just like everything else in our reality, but we'll get back to that later. City of London, together with the Vatican and also Washington, D.C., the 3 independent states that exist in existing countries that pretty much run the world today. So this war in Southern Africa was mobilized to secure Southern Africa and the future exports of gold, platinum, diamonds, and all the mineral wealth of Southern Africa for the crown. And what became very evident to me in recent times is that this South African war from 1899 to 1902 pretty much laid the foundation for what was going to happen in the 20th century between Great Britain and North America, and the colonization of the world and taking control of the world by the royals and the British might from Britain right across the world. And that then brings us to the phenomenal story of Paul Kruger. Most of you will know Paul Kruger as the guy that started the Kruger Park in South Africa, where we keep all the animals today, and the other are the Krugerrands, the Kruger golden coins. And he was the president of the Transvaal Boer Republic, together with President Steyn, who was the president of the Orange Free State. Those two Boer republics resisted the might of the British Empire. Now you can imagine how serious this was. And we find that the British were losing this battle. Even though they had 470,000 troops against a bunch of farmers on horseback, they were losing this battle really badly, until they employed what they referred to as the scorched earth policy. And what this meant is they burned down the farms, they killed all the animals, and they took the women and the children of the Boer farmers and the Boer fighters. They took them hostage, and what did they do with them? They put them into concentration camps. Yes, concentration camps are an invention of the British Empire and not of Nazi Germany, as most may think. It is estimated that about 35,000 Boer women and children died in these concentration camps. There were about 45 of these concentration camps scattered throughout South Africa, and they were pretty much starved to death by the British. And it was an absolute massacre, and an unknown number of black South Africans died in black concentration camps that very little is known about, because this was obviously a well-kept secret. There are some books and some literature written about it, but it remains a very dark part of our most recent history. What is fascinating about this particular war is one particular day, on the 26th of January 1900, which became known as the Battle of Spionkop, because on this one fateful day, on this one little mountain known as Spionkop, 3 world leaders were present. And if any one of these 3 world leaders caught a bullet on that day, in this battle, it would have changed the 20th century completely from what it became and what we know it today. It became known as the bloodiest battle since, and more men apparently died in 1 hectare of land than any other war since then. Arguably the most prominent world leader present on this mountain and in this battle on this day was Winston Churchill. He was a young war correspondent for the British media, who was then taken captive captured by the Boer army. But the little bugger escaped, and he became known as the Brit who got away. Can you imagine if he didn't escape and maybe he was strung up by the Boer army, how the British history would have changed in the years to come, and how the First World and Second World Wars would have changed after this event. The second critical world leader that was present on that same mountain and that same battle on that day was a young Mahatma Gandhi, who was a stretcher bearer for the British troops. You can just imagine what would have happened to the history or the future of India if Mahatma Gandhi had caught a bullet on that day. And then finally, General Louis Botha, who was the general of the Boer army. Now, many of you would not have heard of him, but it is important to realize that only 8 years after he surrendered to the British Empire in 1902, 8 years later in 1910, he then became the first Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa. It was like the United States of Southern Africa, the Union of South Africa, and the Boer Army General that fought against the British became the Prime Minister of the Union of South Africa. Clearly, something strange was going on here, and a foundation was being laid for what was to come in manipulating the future wealth and the mineral wealth that came to the British Empire from this part of the world. Another important event during the South African War happened on the 4th of June 1900, when a train filled with gold left Pretoria, the capital of the Transvaal Republic, headed for Mozambique, the port of Mozambique. It went due east, and estimated that this train was filled with gold, averaging from, well, the estimates go between 30 tons to 3,000 tons. These are all speculations because nobody really knows. The point is that it was a train filled with gold, not just one carriage filled with gold. And some of the gold on this train was some of these well-known veldponde. Veld means field, and these gold coins were minted by the Boer Republic in the field, so they were known as veldponde. Well, today, one of these veldponds is worth about $90,000. So you can imagine the value of that golden train today. I guess it probably would be worth the Kruger trillions and not the Kruger millions. So this famous golden train made its way east through a number of well-known South African towns, and they are Belfast, Machadodorp, Watervalboven, which is the town that I live in today, which is also famous for its thousands of stone circles, and then Watervalonder. These are Dutch words for Watervalboven means waterfall above, and Watervalonder means waterfall below. So there's obviously a steep downhill from Watervalboven to this little house where Paul Kruger lived for several months, where he was really giving the British Empire a rough go for their money. What's fascinating is that when the train got to Machadodorp, something very strange and mysterious happened. Because after Machadodorp, the golden train mysteriously disappeared, never to be seen again. And it remains one of the great treasure mysteries of the 20th century. Every year, thousands of treasure hunters come to South Africa and to this part of the world, Watervalboven, Watervalonder, Machadodorp, and that part of what we call the escarpment, where they come looking for the Kruger millions. Well, I suggest it's the Kruger trillions today. And what I find fascinating is when I've been doing explorations and exploring these stone circles and walk through the mountains and thinking, what the hell's going on here? Every now and then, I come across a big hole in the ground, thinking, why would there be a hole in the middle of a mountain? When suddenly I remember, aha, it's the Kruger millions. Somebody's been here digging for it. I find it amazing that people would put a map together, figure out that it was in this specific place that they would find the Kruger gold, and they come there in the middle of the night and they dig holes. I must tell you that some of these holes are really large, and people go to a lot of trouble to dig these big holes only to find nothing. Well, who knows, maybe they did find something and they took it away, but what's left behind is a big hole in the ground. So I might be mistaken actually thinking that they're finding nothing. Who knows, but it remains a big mystery and remains one of the great treasures for treasure hunters in the world today. The fascinating thing about this is, however, that in 1900, the gold production of South Africa wasn't that big yet, because the gold mines on the reef in Johannesburg, what's known as the reef, or the Witwatersrand, were only discovered in 1896. So the gold production from the Johannesburg area wasn't that big yet in 1900, and most of the original mines in South Africa were in the eastern part, and there were several dozen mines there that weren't producing that much gold. The gold rush in South Africa really started in 1864 in a town called Kaapsehoop, when a 5.2 kilogram, that's about 10.5 pounds, so 10.5 pound gold nugget was found at Kaapsehoop. This resulted in the whole gold rush that we saw in California and also in Australia at the same time. So it's fascinating just to see how this gold rush started in 3 different continents, the North Americas, Southern Africa, and Australia at about the same time. Well, the interesting thing about Kaapsehoop, this little town right on the edge of the Transvaal escarpment, that's where the Highveld ends and the Lowveld begins. It's known as the Transvaal escarpment. Kaapsehoop is also famous for a very important ancient site, and that one is known as Adam's Calendar. Here is a view from Kabsahup from the lookout point and little town that became a real frontier gold mining town with bars and saloons and dancing girls and the typical kind of town that you see in Western movies. And it's amazing and remains a great tourist attraction today. It's a tiny little village today, but at one stage it had about 15,000 people that lived there in this little gold mining frontier town. So this also happens to be the home of Adam's calendar, and this is a critical bit of information. This is a view from the lookout point at Kabsahup, as I mentioned, overlooking the Barberton Valley, which is most likely an impact crater from about 3 billion years ago. And this Barberton Valley is also known for some of the oldest rock formations that geologists go crazy about and come from all over the world to study. But the Barberton Valley is also known for two other things, which is the town of Barberton, another gold mining frontier town, and what remains arguably the most wealthiest gold mine in the world today, known as Sheba Gold Mine, which is just outside of Barberton. So Kabsahup overlooks the Barberton Valley, which incidentally is filled with about 30 meters of sea sand sediment, and I'll get back to that later when we talk about what really happened to this ancient civilization, but I'm giving you a clue and a hint at this stage. And further down about 4 kilometers along the same escarpment, we find Adam's calendar looking out at the same Barberton Valley and Sheba Gold Mine. What I can tell you is that the same Barberton Valley would have been filled with hundreds of gold mines in ancient times. The question we should be asking ourselves is not what happened to the train and the gold. And unfortunately, people get stuck on this because they get so obsessed with the gold and the train and where did it disappear? Where's the gold? Where's the train? And let's go find it. And this is why so many people come looking for the gold and the train, and we get obsessed about what happened to the gold. That's not really important. The critical question is, where did Paul Kruger get all the gold from? Because in 1900, there wasn't enough gold in South Africa to fill a whole train, because it wasn't just one carriage, it was a train filled with gold that left Pretoria on its way to Mozambique. So once again, this brings us to gold and the links to ancient civilizations and our obsession with gold. So if Africa is supposed to be the cradle of humankind, can we find the origins of gold mining in southern Africa? And the answer is absolutely. There are never-ending tales and stories about ancient gold mines in southern Africa, just like there are all over the world. In South Africa, we have some classic examples of ancient gold mines that mysteriously lie hidden from modern gold mining companies, and yet there's so much that has been exposed over the last few decades and the last 100 years. In the town of Lydenburg, for example, that is famous for what are called the Lydenburg heads, these strange-looking ceramic heads, masks that have been discovered in the 1930s just outside the town of Lydenburg that clearly show some strange humanoid features that are not of earthling origin, that suggests some sort of alien intervention here. The Lydenburg heads, just around the town of Lydenburg, a survey was conducted, a geological survey between the year 2005 and 2010, where they explored and counted as many as they could of these ancient gold mines. They're known as adit mines because they go into the side of the mountains, and they started the count in 2005, and I believe this was under the instruction of Anglo-American to try and stop people from illegally mining gold, because many of these mines are just abandoned but still contain lots of gold. It's not easy to get it out and not easy to process it, but you can if you want to. So by the time they finish counting these ancient added gold mines, and I can also tell you incidentally that these mines were not initiated in the gold rush of 1864. These were rediscovered by the gold miners that created the gold rush and reused from ancient times. I believe these mines have been there for thousands and thousands of years and just rediscovered and reused by the gold miners that started the gold rush in this part of the world. But by the time they finished this geological survey and stopped counting, they counted more than or around 75,000 of these gold mines, which made it a little difficult to close them all up to prevent gold mining or illegal gold mining, even by the mighty Anglo-American. There are many mysterious tunnels that were discovered by miners and gold miners in the 30s. What's fascinating about this story is that, and I've had at least 2 of these stories told to me by the sons of the gold miners in the 20s and 30s in the northern part of South Africa, when suddenly at about 100 feet deep, they came across these mysterious tunnels. What they then did is they called the authorities, the mining authorities, and in those days it was the Merensky Company that was the mining authority in South Africa, and they had all the rights to all the gold mining and controlled everything, together with Anglo-American and the whole legacy of Cecil John Rhodes and the De Beers Empire that was emerging in southern Africa at that stage already. But when the Merensky authorities came, they found these mysterious tools and artifacts in these tunnels that shouldn't be there. They confiscated the tools and artifacts. They told the miners, "Thank you for calling us," and their words were, "We are aware of this." Now that I find very mysterious, that they were aware of the tools and artifacts and aware of these ancient tunnels, and they disappeared. In the Volkbach Mountain, northern South Africa, there are accounts of dozens and dozens of kilometers of underground tunnels, ancient gold mines that show evidence of gold mining, and strangely enough, they left behind the platinum slag. They were clearly not interested in the platinum, they were only interested in the gold. And these mines are being told by people that actually walked to these tunnels for kilometers upon end, and they claim that this is spectacular ancient evidence of ancient gold mining. In the 1990s, De Beers claims to have discovered, or should I say, De Beers confessed to having discovered an ancient mine shaft that was 22,000 feet deep. They said it was cut with such absolute precision and technology that they didn't understand. And this clearly indicates an ancient civilization with advanced tools and technology that we are going to get to in the series. Anglo-American confessed to me, to their chief geologist, over a beer at a pub, believe it or not, when he told me that they often come across ancient vanished civilizations and ancient mines and tunnels and mine shafts, and their instructions are very simply, when you come across ancient mines, cover it up and move right on. When I met this guy who was a chief geologist at a pub at a friend of mine's birthday party, he volunteers this information to me, and he told me that just recently, this is in 2006, just recently they found an ancient mine shaft near the town of Bloemfontein, which is the capital of the Orange Free State in South Africa, and that blew my mind. I asked him, "So did you find anything, any remains?" And he said, "Yeah, there were some skeletal remains at the bottom of the shaft. It was about 500 meters deep, I recall," he told me. And I said, "So what did you do? What did you do?" And he said, "Well, we just closed it up and moved right on." And the file sits in a secret file at Anglo-American's head office, where they must have thousands of accounts of ancient gold mines. But the mystery continues. In very recent times, in 2014, in a modern mine on the West Rand in South Africa, where a lot of the gold mines are found today, one of the sides of the mine passage, the mine tunnel, opened up and exposed an ancient gold mine and a tunnel that was cut with precision that they could not understand and clearly was not their doing. When they called the mine authorities, that whole section of the mine was closed up, everyone was evacuated, never to go back into that part of the mine again. So you can clearly see an agenda here that whenever this kind of information gets exposed, they just close it up, cover it up, and move right along. There's a great example of ancient gold mining in the northeast province of Zimbabwe, in the so-called slave pits, or the Nyanga pits. Now, modern historians and archaeologists call these pits in the ground made out of stone, they call them slave pits, animal pits, or grain pits. Now, It's laughable if you try and call it slave pits, because obviously if you put slaves in there, they're going to climb out and get out. There's no way you're going to keep them in there. So it's nonsensical. It's nonsensical to think that you can put grain in there or animals in there. How are you going to get them out? So a brilliant Zimbabwe geologist by the name of Ann Kritzinger at Zimbabwe University started doing some research on this, and she found something startling. She found that all these so-called slave pits had inlet valves and they had outlet valves. The outlet valves were normally slightly lower than the inlet valves, but what she found was that in the outlet valves there was sedimentation of up to 2 grams per ton of gold in the outlet valves, leading her to the conclusion that these must have been some sort of gold processing tanks in ancient times for the purification or the extraction of gold, leading to the sedimentation of gold in the outlet valves to these tanks. But one of the most exciting discoveries for me about ancient gold mining in South Africa comes from the town of Carltonville, when a team of mine rescuers, or a mine rescue team, around 1975, because the man that told me the story, who died a few months after he told me the story a few years ago now, had told me he'd never told the story to anyone before he told me, because he thought they would just think he was crazy. So in about 1975, they were testing their equipment and they went down a sinkhole, and these sinkholes around this part of South Africa are common occurrence. They keep appearing every now and then because of the draining of the water by the mines and creating these sudden sinkholes that appear out of nowhere. And they were testing their equipment. They went down the sinkhole, and at the bottom of the sinkhole, about 20 or 30 meters deep, they found one of the sides that was caved in. When they opened it up and moved into a tunnel that they found, what did they find? They found an ancient tunnel that was paved all the way around. The bottom and the sides was paved. They were absolutely amazed, and they walked into the darkness several meters to be confronted by a statue which he refers to that resembles something like Viracocha, or the pre-Inca creator, the pre-Inca deity that is closely associated with gold and the mining of gold and the obsession of gold in ancient civilizations. This just highlights how the mining of gold across ancient civilizations can be connected from all over the world, and they seem to be a connecting point and evidence of all ancient cultures at the southern tip of Africa